Top 5 Creepypastas from December. 1. When I spoke, it wasn't me.
When I was 18 and my sister was 5, I was babysitting in the basement of our family's house while my mom was in the shower and my stepdad was asleep. It was my mom's birthday, so she took one of those long, indulgent showers, and I knew she'd be in there for a while. I set out some toys for my sister and turned on the TV. The faint sound of water running was the only noise in the house, aside from the television. Our basement is set up so that the sofa is right against the wall next to the stair landing. When you're sitting on it, if you turn to the right, you can see straight up the stairs. In front of us was the rest of the room: TV, coffee table, the usual. As an 18-year-old who thought it was funny to tease my younger sister, I switched the channel to a scary movie. She glanced at the screen for a moment, then proudly declared, "Sissy, I'm not scared." Of course, that took the fun out of it, so I quickly turned off the TV and fiddled with my phone while my sister played with her toys on the floor. Time passed, 5 minutes, maybe longer, but everything suddenly seemed to still. There was a shift in the atmosphere, like the house had stood frozen. The air felt thick, the lights felt brighter. From the top of the stairs, a voice called down to us. It was familiar, but strange. Distant, almost as if it were coming from another place or another period that wasn't my own. It was far away, but at the same time, so eerily close. It was right at the top of those stairs. My mom was still in the shower, and my stepdad was asleep. This voice, though, was not his, even if he had been awake. It didn't belong to anyone in the house. But it was there, undeniable. It was a girl's voice. A cold, calm voice. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I didn't want to look up those stairs. I knew someone was standing there, and I knew that if I turned my head I would see them, whatever they were. I glanced at my sister. Her wide, tear-filled eyes were locked on me. She wasn't moving. I tried to stay calm, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. "What's wrong, baby?" I whispered. She barely spoke, as if she didn't want whoever, or whatever, was at the top of the stairs to hear her. "Who was that?" she whispered back, her voice barely audible. At that moment I knew she'd heard it too. And I wasn't going crazy. "Who was what?" I asked, forcing myself to stay steady, though my stomach churned and my ears pounded with the sound of my own heartbeat. She stared at me with those big, wide eyes. "Who said that?" My mind was racing, but I asked anyway. "What did the voice say?" And then, with a small, trembling voice, she repeated it. "Hey, Kaylee?" That was my name. My name. She had confirmed my fears in those 2 words, as she focused on my face, awaiting an answer that might ease her discomfort. There was no emotion in the voice, no warmth, no recognition. Just the flatness of a question for me. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't look at the stairs. My body locked in place as I reached for my sister. She bolted into my lap, trembling. We sat there, staring straight ahead, not daring to move. We waited, for what felt like forever, until the sound of the shower finally stopped. My mom's footsteps echoed down the hall. I could barely breathe. My chest was heavy. I hurried upstairs, holding my sister tightly, keeping my eyes narrowed towards the ground. I asked my mom if she had called me, but she said no. There was no way it could have been her. Of course it wasn't her. That's when it hit me. The voice, the one that had called my name, it sounded too familiar. It sounded like me. And that was just the beginning. Over the years, I started hearing it more often, my own voice. My mom would call me, frantic, telling me she'd heard me in the halls of our home, calling for her. But the words I'd spoken were strange, childish, almost things like, "Mommy, help me," or, "I need you." I hadn't called her Mommy since I was a child. And it wasn't just confined to the walls of my mother's home. I'd catch it in my house too. Once I heard myself say, "Bless you," after I sneezed. I would hear it whistling sometimes, or humming tunes I didn't recognize. A low, almost mocking hum. It felt like something was trying to get my attention, only to slip away when I tried to focus on it. At first, I only noticed small, unsettling signs that something was happening to me. I'd walk into rooms I could have sworn I'd already been in, catching a glimpse of myself standing motionless in a corner or sitting unnaturally still in a chair, eyes fixed in a blank stare. At times, when I looked into the mirror, my reflection wouldn't move in sync with me. Its eyes would linger a fraction too long, and the corners of its mouth would twitch as though it was forcing back a smile. My clothes would be dirted and worn, even though I'd never touched them, and strange stains I didn't recognize would appear on my hands. Then, my favorite foods, those things I would savor slowly, started to disappear faster than I could eat them. I'd turn my back for just a moment, and when I looked again, entire plates of food were gone, as if someone else was feeding on them. I started finding things, objects I didn't recognize, sitting in the corner of my room, in my closet, under my bed. Little trinkets. Childish toys. Their presence made no sense. I would wake up to find that I had drawn pictures in my sleep. Abstract, disturbing images of eyes, mouths, strange shapes I couldn't decipher. But when I tried to remember doing it, my mind was blank. I couldn't explain it. I didn't feel like I was in control. I've felt it, whatever it is, slithering under my skin, like a dark presence crawling through my veins, pulling at my muscles, trying to take control. And I couldn't stop it. I started to withdraw from friends and family. Conversations with them began to feel hollow, as if I wasn't really present, like I was always a step behind, always trying to catch up to what they were saying. At night, I would wake to hear my name whispered from the dark corner of my room, but when I checked, nothing was there. I knew what I was hearing. It was me. That mocking, childish voice would speak from the shadows, like it was taking pleasure in my fear. The worst part is, I'm starting to lose track of time. I'll wake up hours, maybe days later, in places I don't remember being. And there's that voice again, calling my name from somewhere I can't reach, or sometimes laughing softly, as if amused by my confusion. Every night, it gets harder to tell where I end and the thing pretending to be me begins. At times I wondered if I had completely lost my mind. It was becoming harder to distinguish where I ended and where it began. I can't escape it. I can't escape the sound of my own voice, echoing back at me from some place I can't reach. Someone, has taken it, and I'm afraid it's never going to let go. And now, I'm not sure I'll ever be me again. I've stopped looking in mirrors because I'm terrified of what I'll see. The reflection no longer matches the person I used to be. My face is wrong, my eyes are too wide, my smile too sharp, as if it's someone else wearing my skin. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear my voice calling to me from other rooms, or see myself standing in a doorway, watching me with that same eerie, unsettling stillness. I thought I could fight it. I tried to scream, to make the voice stop, but all I could do was watch helplessly as it twisted my sense of being, shaping my former self into something alien. I've tried to tell people, to ask for help, but no one believes me. They think it's stress, or maybe I'm just imagining things. But I know better. I can feel it burrowing into me, and it's not stopping. I'm not sure if this is the last time I'll try to ask for help, or if it's just another desperate moment in a never-ending loop of this, whatever this is. But I know one thing for certain, I've become a stranger in my own body. And soon, I won't even recognize myself anymore. Maybe I'll just disappear altogether. Maybe it's already too late. Even now, as my fingers tremble over the keys, I can almost feel the cold pressure of another hand on mine, guiding each letter with deliberate precision. I can hear my own voice in low whispers, forcing me to finish the sentence I was too terrified to write. When I spoke, it wasn't me.
2. My crow speaks to the dead.
I had taught my crow to speak, and now he rested with mended wing upon my shoulder. Having left the dead body upon the trail, I felt sick in my soul. It wasn't exactly easy, despite my coldness in acting it out. I had murdered him, and now I had an even greater responsibility. I had to find a way back to my own path. "Which way do we turn?" I asked Corey, the crow upon my shoulder. How should I know, my lord? Corey looked back the way we had come. I want to turn myself in, I said, feeling nauseated at the fading adrenaline. I only wanted to escape the fear of man's justice. I'd acted according to what I knew was right. At least, that is what I had thought I had done. It had never occurred to me that Curl could do more inside my head than just cloud it. Had she compelled me to commit murder? I decided not. It was going to be my responsibility. Whether it was right or not could not solve the crisis, a feeling that I now owed a debt. As I once stated in my own words, "These hath given me life, and for death, life is but the knowledge." But such words did not comfort me. I opened the wallet with my sleeves and looked at his ID and memorized it before I stole the money. Then I simply discarded the empty husk onto the path where it would forewarn of his mortal coil as it cooled eternally. Unless his family decided to cremate him. I found my way there and camped in a house marked by the sheriff. It was a former meth lab and nobody dared. Well, except me, I am still somebody, even if I am to be known as a murderer. I meant to make that so, by watching over his family for now. Would he have loved them again, in time? I asked Corey. I was looking at his family as the police delivered the news. Would Amityville love them again, in time? Corey asked me back and clicked a reprisal into my ear before adding, "In time, all things do come to be. Death will always happen." Are you saying he might have killed them? I wondered. This made me feel slightly better somehow, about murdering John. You might have killed him. I asked you, will he die, and you did. Corey recalled. He wasn't really happy about it either. It had changed our path. I left to buy some food and discovered that the police wanted to talk to me already. I am Detective Winters. I heard you are new to the neighborhood. Do you travel around on foot a lot? Detective Winters never blinked or took his eyes off of me. Yes, I told him nervously. Is there something I can help you with? Do you live here? He pointed to the boarded-up meth lab with the sheriff's signs marking it off limits. I just nodded. And you want to be helpful, is that it? I'd like to be helpful. I promised. I worried he would ask me about the murder I'd committed. Fear started to slowly rise as I anticipated this change in the conversation. He lit a cigarette with a Zippo that was low on fuel and muttered about quitting soon. Got someone murdered. This guy is dead. Thing is, we can't figure out how he made his way down there or anything. Maybe you could help us figure out what he was doing down in the Rust Pond. Detective Winters blew smoke at me. You found him in the Rust Pond? I asked, hearing the surprise and strangeness of my own voice. Like we should have found him somewhere else. Detective Winters nodded appreciatively. He thought for a moment, and finished his smoke very quickly before he raised one foot and put it out on the bottom of it. He flicked the butt away and spat. Then he looked at me and stared like that for a long, awkward moment. So? I asked, sweating. Never mind that. I am interested in your help for now. He gestured for me to follow him, and I clicked, and my crow hopped up along the path behind us. Corey said, This man is strange. He wants nothing from you and asks you for something. Corey got onto my lap as I sat in the back of his car. My groceries were next to me and I started eating in his car. I fed some bologna to Corey. That thing sounds like it is talking. Detective Winters lit a smoke with his car's lighter and then rolled down his window to blow out the smoke. Where are we going? I asked. I want to show you what I mean, and see what you think. Detective Winters told me. Also, I really like you. I think we should stay really close for now, like closer than friends. I will get you a hotel room and we can eat lunch together every day. How's that sound? I'd rather not. I replied. I will pay for lunch. This is not negotiable, my friend who is closer than a friend. Detective Winters swore like an oath in his voice, as he said those words looking at me in the rearview mirror. I guess I should value your friendship. I complained. I guess you should. Detective Winters agreed. We went behind the police tape. The Rust Pond was miles from where they had found the body of the man I'd killed. Detective Winters said. We had to use ladders, ropes. He pointed to how they had gotten to the body. He didn't fall. He was down there doing something. I will show you. I felt confident there was a trail. I left them and listened and felt Corey's guidance, purrs and clicks and soft nudges of his feet. He was very nervous for some reason. Must go now. Corey spoke as we went down the trail he had found. Detective Winters was following us along with another policeman. We must help them, I told Corey. We found the rust pond, emerging from behind some bushes from the polluted barrens beyond. The body was still there, covered now. White ash was in patterns on the black carpet of rotting leaves where the water level had drawn lower. The slick and foul-smelling wetness greeted us rather than the body. No flies had come here. He was casting a spell. I told Detective Winters and pointed at the white ash circle. Do you know how he died? Detective Winters asked. I did not, and so I just stood there and said nothing. The other policeman wandered nearer to the body and looked at the strange white ash circle. We were alone down there. They were getting ready to remove the body, but we were alone with it, beneath the lights and ladders. His soul is trapped, my lord. He has done a great evil. It was his way to silence it with magic, but instead he woke it up. It remains, lingering and hungering for revenge, indiscriminately. Corey told me as he hopped around on the ground anxiously. I held perfectly still. My hand was aching and there was no mist. Something was very wrong here. I tried not to move any part of myself. Corey flitted to my shoulder and tried to remain as still as I. Detective Winters walked around us and looked at us and around. It was particularly dark in that shaded place, thus the usage of the lights from above. There was no way out except the path through the bushes and barrens back to the top. That or the ladders. Something besides us was breathing, and its breath was an unnatural fog. I could feel it. Terror seized my heart as I knew the presence of some unnatural and bloodthirsty thing. Something dead he had woke up, Corey had said. Apparently the trapped soul had confessed everything to my bird. What is that? Hands up. Show me your hands. The policeman was yelling at something lurking just out of sight, in the darkness. It lunged at him and he shrieked and fumbled with his firearm, dropping it. As he went to his knees, under its strength, I saw it and my blood froze. It was choking him between its boned fingers and its bare skull's grin held no mercy for the living. It dropped him lifelessly with his throat crushed and looked up at me with eyeless sockets. Officer down. Detective Winters drew his weapon and shot the skull apart and off with the thing's right arm. The torso flailed forward, coming now for Detective Winters. Agitate the circle of ash, Corey advised me. I stepped forward and used my foot to ruin the spell. 2 more gunshots blew apart the remains of the skeletal horror, and it collapsed into a heap near Detective Winters. That's what killed the victim. My crow says it was angry with him for murdering it and burying it here. He woke it up while trying to silence it using magic. I told him after we had climbed the ladders back out. I've only got enough on me for McDonald's. Detective Winters took me to his car and left me there while he went and debriefed someone. I eyed the wreckage of my groceries I had snacked on while we drove here. Corey was hungry too. Our new friend came back after a while. I like Happy Meals, I told him from the back seat.
3. Payback. I was just returning back from another interview. It has been the 3rd one this month. I failed to make the cut yet again. Life hasn't been easy for an ex-soldier with the economic downturn currently underway. The COVID pandemic had also wiped out all my savings. So I was open to securing any job that would help me pay my bills. I hadn't eaten all day and just passed by a McDonald's. It was already crowded, and I thought to myself, let me just order a takeout. I could see a few vehicles waiting in front of me. There was a guy in his motorcycle honking incessantly, demanding the customer in front to keep it moving. He was a tall man with long hair and clearly looked edgy and irritable. Both his arms were heavily tattooed. He stepped down from his bike and started to walk towards the car in front of him. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I could see the conversation was getting heated. I got down from my car and walked towards the biker guy. As I got closer, the biker banged on the hood of the car and was pointing his finger at the man threateningly. The guy in the car was looking a little alarmed. He had a young boy seated next to him. The woman working at the driveway counter appealed to the biker to maintain his cool, but he would hear none of it. She then proceeded to call the police, and this made the biker more irate. He snatched the receiver from her and hit her face with it. She fell backwards and started bleeding from the nose. The biker then proceeded to turn his gaze towards the man in the car. He opened the door and dragged the guy outside. He drew his hand back to throw a punch at him. I caught his arm from behind and kicked him hard in the shins. He yelped in pain and let go of the other man. He then turned back angrily to take a look at me. He was wearing a black jacket with the name Kenny embossed in front. I said, "Listen, Kenny, I have had a really bad day. So you either stop this madness, or I am going to break your bones." He snarled and threw a punch at me with all his might. I swerved to the right and ducked just in time, causing him to miss completely. Next, he whipped out a switchblade from his pocket and lunged towards me with it. I sidestepped him and counterattacked with a punch to his plexus. He went down on one knee. I caught hold of his knife arm and ordered him to drop it. "Drop the knife, Kenny. This is your last warning," I repeated. He started to fidget with his other arm around his shoe. I realized he had another weapon hidden in his sock. So before he could attempt anything else, I twisted his forearm and landed a crushing blow to his elbow. It snapped into two and he lay on the floor yelping in pain. By this point, other people came forward to intervene and help with the situation. As Kenny was being led away by the police, he kept staring at me with madness in his eyes. "I am coming back for you. This is going to be the biggest regret of your life," he yelled. I didn't care and started going back to my car. Then the man who was threatened by Kenny came forward and shook my hand. "Hi, I am Rupert. That is my son Henry," he said. I waved my hand at the boy and he waved back. "I would like to thank you for what you did for me back there," he said. "You not only helped me maintain my dignity, but also helped me save face in front of my son," he continued. "This means a lot to me as a dad," he said. I nodded in acknowledgement, not sure what I was to add to the conversation. He then reluctantly asked, "Is there anything I can do to repay the favor? Please feel free to ask." "Anything. I would be most grateful." I thought for a moment. I could see the man was wealthy. "If it's not too much of an ask, I would appreciate a job if available. If you feel that is difficult, no problem. Forget I asked. No worries," I said. He smiled back at me warmly. He reached into his pocket and handed me a card. "Please come to my office tomorrow, we can talk." He signed off. From that moment on, I became the personal bodyguard and chaperone of his 8-year-old son, Henry. We immediately hit it off and became pals. I looked after all his son's traveling arrangements. We would also go to McDonald's every week for his favorite burger and fries. I later learnt that his father was a very wealthy man who made most of his money during the dot-com bubble. I also became friends with the female employee at the driveway counter who had earlier been attacked by that biker punk Kenny. Her name was Stella, and it didn't take very long for the two of us to start dating. With a fulfilling job and a loving girlfriend by my side, my life was finally back on track. I couldn't be happier. And then one day, it all came crashing. Henry and I, as usual, visited the McDonald's joint, and I was surprised to see Stella missing at the counter. I asked the staff about her, and they said she hadn't turned up today. I thought that was weird. She had stayed over at my place, and I saw her leave for work in the morning. I tried calling her number, but it was unreachable. I dropped Henry at home and headed towards Stella's apartment. She had given me a spare key, and I opened the door with it. Everything was in its place. I tried her number again. It remained not reachable. I decided to go back to my apartment to check if she might be there. When I reached the door, I could see the lock had been smashed. The door was left slightly open. I took out my sidearm and slowly entered the apartment. I could see a life-size figure of Ronald McDonald the clown sitting on my sofa. The famous mascot was sitting leaning back against the cushion with one arm resting on the backrest, just like how he likes to sit on benches outside McDonald outlets all across the world. I was a little taken aback, but quickly switched on the lights to take a closer look. As I moved closer, my knees buckled under my own weight. It was Stella. She was the one who was dressed as the clown. There were injury marks around her neck. She had been strangled to death. I managed to call the cops while still reeling from the shock. I also noticed her right hand, which was resting on her thigh, was close-fisted. When I pried it open, I found a crumpled piece of paper inside. It read, "She was really begging me for mercy. Where was Soldier Boy when she needed him, huh? Boo-hoo. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Signed, yours, Kenny." I could feel a surge of anger envelop me, and yet I lay there helpless. Had it not been for the surveillance cameras at the entrance of my home, I would have been imprisoned by now. The police could clearly see Kenny carrying Stella's body and breaking into my apartment. They put out a nationwide notice for Kenny, and he's been on the run ever since. Even after 2 months following Stella's death, the police were not any closer to catching the culprit. But I did apprise Henry's dad of the situation. His life was also at risk after considering what happened to my girlfriend. But our collective worry was for Henry. We didn't want to see him suffer for no fault of his. So I started training Henry to take his own safety seriously. I devised multiple safeguards to keep him protected while being outdoors. Always ensured that I was personally there to drop and pick him up from school. My boss appreciated all that I was doing for his son. He knew I had taken Stella's death hard. He was a generous and compassionate man, and I liked working for him. Although he did notice I wasn't my usual cheery self anymore. One day when I was waiting at the office, he tossed the keys of his new car at me. "This should perk you up. Take her for a spin," he said. "And also go pick Henry up from school," he finished as he left for a meeting. I got down to the parking lot, and there she was, waiting. The new Bugatti Chiron. I opened the door and took the driver's seat. The fresh smell of the leather upholstery was already lifting my spirits. Boss was right. I am perking up, I thought to myself. I drove around the block and stopped by McDonald's to pick up the usual order for me and Henry. I felt a tinge of sadness when I could no longer see Stella at the counter. Anyways, I picked the order and started my way towards school. As I went past the restaurant, I saw an old Jeep parked by the side of the road. I didn't think much of it at that moment. When I reached Henry's school, I parked the car a few feet away from the entrance. A couple of minutes later, I noticed the same Jeep I saw at McDonald's go past me and park 20 meters in front. I would have never given it a second glance had I not spotted it at the restaurant. The Jeep had 3 passengers. They looked like bikers with tattoos, beard, and long hair. And then there was Kenny, standing behind a tree to avoid detection. But I spotted him. He was gesturing towards them to get ready. I could see his Harley parked just a few feet away. They were planning some kind of ambush. The school bell rang, and the children were already out on the streets. I could see Henry at a distance in the courtyard. He was slowly making his way towards the gate. I immediately called him on the phone and told him to go to the principal's office and stay there. I made it clear under no circumstances was he to venture out until I gave him the all clear. He understood. He was safe as long as he was within the school's premises. The next thing to do was move to another location. The children were already pouring onto the streets, and the last thing I wanted was to see a child getting hurt. I started the car and went past the Jeep before taking the next turn. I kept driving. A few moments later, the Jeep caught up with me and the driver violently swerved towards the left, causing me to go off course. My car came to halt. The guys quickly alighted from the Jeep and they were all armed to the teeth. Kenny came in his motorcycle and stopped his bike a few feet ahead of me. He took out his shotgun and had it aimed straight at my chest. The firing started before I even had the time to react. I instinctively ducked for cover with my eyes closed, but in my heart, I knew my time was up. As the seconds went by, even with all those bullets being sent my way, my body felt strangely light. Am I in heaven already? I thought to myself. I slowly opened my eyes and tilted my head upwards to take a peek, and I realized I was sitting in an armored bulletproof car. The entire biker gang were mad with rage, doing everything possible to penetrate that thick armor plate. Kenny was barking orders at his gang to continue the onslaught. He then pointed his finger at me and yelled, "I am coming for you." I looked down at the seat next to mine and saw the takeout I had ordered. Just to piss him off even further, I took out my Big Mac and slowly took a big bite. I sat there in gastronomic bliss savoring my burger, while being under a continuous hail of bullets. The firing suddenly stopped. Kenny the Psycho was livid as hell to see me have a good time. I looked him in the eye while I took a sip of my favorite milkshake, and then continued to chomp on my burger. He looked a little crestfallen at how his plan was misfiring and then frantically gestured his troops to keep at it. The firing started again, but it didn't last long. They eventually all ran out of ammo and his buddies began to flee the scene as we could hear sirens at a distance. The attack had taken a toll on the car, but it managed to withstand all that damage, all that firing. A lifesaver. I looked at Kenny again. Only one thought was running through my head now. My turn. I switched on the ignition and rammed the car straight into Kenny. He hit the bonnet hard while the car continued to race forward. He was clinging onto dear life with his outstretched hands, desperately clutching at the sides of the car. Next in the demolition line was his prized Harley-Davidson. I hit it full steam and watched it smash to smithereens, with parts scattering all across the road. Then, I hit the brakes and Kenny was sent flying 10 feet forward. After impact, he slowly staggered to his feet, all bloody and bruised. His face was swollen like an apple. He was pleading towards me with folded hands to show him mercy. "This is for Stella, and she's loving it," I said out loud. I hit the accelerator again. 4. Santa Claus Chimney Horror.
The town of Silver Hollow was known for its peaceful winters, where snow blanketed the streets and the sound of carolers filled the crisp December air. Nestled between rolling hills and an evergreen forest, the town seemed like the perfect place to celebrate Christmas. But beneath its charming facade, Silver Hollow hid a dark secret, a shadow that returned every Christmas Eve. The story began decades ago with a man named Gerald Forrester, a recluse who lived in a cabin deep within the woods. Gerald had been a toymaker, crafting beautiful wooden figures that the townsfolk would eagerly buy for their children. But one Christmas, a tragic fire consumed his home, taking his life and his creations. Rumors began to swirl that Gerald's spirit lingered, seeking revenge for the loss of his craft and the indifference of the townsfolk. Every year after Gerald's death, strange events occurred on Christmas Eve. Families reported hearing faint tapping on their windows, even on the upper floors of their homes. Others claimed to see a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching the town in silence. The stories were dismissed as folklore, a tale to keep children entertained or fearful enough to behave. But one Christmas Eve, the McAllister family experienced the legend firsthand. Having recently moved to Silver Hollow, they were unaware of the town's dark history. Their cozy home sat near the forest's edge, with a large fireplace they had eagerly decorated with stockings and garlands. As the snow fell heavily that evening, the McAllisters gathered around the fire. The warmth of the flames and the glow of the Christmas tree filled the room with comfort. Their young daughter, Lily, was particularly excited, hanging a plate of cookies for Santa on the mantel. At precisely midnight, the tapping began. It was faint at first, almost rhythmic, as if someone were lightly rapping on the windows. Mr. McAllister, thinking it might be a branch swaying in the wind, went to investigate. But when he looked outside, he saw only his own reflection in the frosted glass. The tapping grew louder, and the family began to feel uneasy. Lily clung to her mother, her small hand trembling. "It's just the wind," Mrs. McAllister reassured her, though her voice wavered. Suddenly, the fireplace roared, the flames shooting up as if stoked by an unseen hand. The garlands hanging above the mantel fell, igniting briefly before extinguishing. The room plunged into an unnatural cold, and the tapping ceased, replaced by a faint whispering. The voices seemed to echo from the walls themselves, growing louder until they formed words. "Leave the forest, undisturbed." Mr. McAllister grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door, determined to put an end to the unsettling noises. Snowflakes swirled in the air, and the forest loomed ominously in the distance. He saw nothing at first, but then his beam of light caught movement among the trees. A tall shadow shifted, disappearing deeper into the woods. Despite his wife's protests, he ventured out, the crunch of snow under his boots the only sound accompanying him. The forest seemed alive, the trees creaking and groaning as if whispering secrets. The deeper he went, the darker it became, until the beam of his flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead. Meanwhile, back in the house, the whispers grew louder. Mrs. McAllister tried to comfort Lily, but her own fear was evident. The Christmas lights on the tree flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. One shadow, larger than the others, began to move independently, stretching toward the fireplace. Lily pointed at it, her voice barely a whisper. "It's him," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. McAllister pulled her closer, unsure of what to do. The shadow grew, taking on a humanoid form with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. It stood still, watching them, before raising a hand to point toward the forest. At that moment, Mr. McAllister stumbled back into the house, pale and shaking. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "Now." The family hurried to their car, the shadow's gaze following them as they drove away. As they passed the edge of the forest, the shadow dissolved into the trees, leaving only an eerie silence behind. The McAllisters never returned to Silver Hollow, and their story became another chapter in the town's dark legend. Locals avoided the forest entirely, especially on Christmas Eve, when the shadow of Gerald Forrester was said to walk among the trees, watching, waiting, and ensuring that no one disturbed his eternal rest. Over the years, the town's population dwindled, and Silver Hollow became little more than a ghost town. But travelers passing through on snowy December nights sometimes report hearing faint tapping on their car windows or seeing a shadowy figure standing just beyond the tree line, reminding them that some spirits never truly rest.
5. Shadows of the Past.
It started with a tap on my shoulder. I was at the local VFW hall, a place I visited every now and then when the memories got too heavy, and I needed to be around people who understood. The air smelled like stale beer and cigarettes, and the TV in the corner buzzed with some football game I wasn't watching. "Hey," a voice said behind me, gravelly and close. "You're Navy, right?" I turned around, and there he was. A tall, wiry man with a thin face and eyes that didn't quite seem to match the rest of him. He was wearing an old Navy service uniform, one that hadn't been regulation for decades, and the ribbons on his chest looked wrong. They were all out of order, and some of them didn't belong on the same rack. I noticed a trident pin, too, slapped on like an afterthought. I forced a polite smile, nodding. "Yeah. I served." His face split into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Me too. SEAL Team 2, back in the day. Got a couple Purple Hearts, a Silver Star. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, because guys who actually earned those medals didn't brag about them to strangers. Something in my gut twisted, but I didn't say anything. "Not yet." "Yet," I said casually. "What year were you with Team 2? He rattled off a timeline that didn't make sense. Something about Panama, but the dates didn't line up with when the SEALs were actually there. I nodded along, letting him talk, but the more he went on, the angrier I got. He wasn't just lying, he was weaving this elaborate story about missions he'd never been on and brothers he'd never known. Every word felt like a slap to the faces of the guys I'd served with, the ones who didn't come home. "So, what about you?" he asked, leaning in. "What was your MOS?" I stared at him, debating whether to call him out right there. But something stopped me. There was something off about him, something more than the lies. His grin was too wide, his laugh too sharp, his eyes darting around the room like he was watching for someone. "Bosun's mate," I said simply, keeping my voice calm. He clapped me on the shoulder, harder than necessary. "Good man. Hard work, bosuns. My team worked with your type all the time. Couldn't do the missions without you. I gritted my teeth. Aha. He launched into another story, this one about some mission in the Middle East. I stopped listening halfway through. My eyes kept drifting to his uniform, to the medals and patches he hadn't earned. I thought about all the nights I'd spent out on the water, staring at the endless black ocean, wondering if we'd make it back. And here this guy was, turning it all into a damn costume. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. Hey, I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. Where'd you get that uniform? His smile faltered. What do you mean? It's mine. Earned it. Right, I said, my voice cold. So you know it's illegal to wear medals you didn't earn, right? Stolen valor. His grin disappeared entirely. For a moment, he just stared at me, and I thought he might back down. But then his face twisted into something ugly. You think you're better than me? He snarled, his voice dropping. You think you're some kind of hero? The room got quiet. The other vets at the bar were watching now, their conversations trailing off. I don't think anything, I said evenly. I know what I've done. And I know you weren't there. He took a step closer, and I could see the veins standing out on his neck. You don't know what I've been through, he hissed. You don't know anything about me. I know you're lying, I said, my voice low but steady. For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. His fists clenched, his body tensed, and his eyes burned with something that looked almost feral. But then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was high-pitched and shaky, like something was snapping inside him. You think you're safe, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You think you're untouchable just because you're one of them? I didn't know what he meant by one of them, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. Before I could respond, he turned and walked out of the hall, his boots echoing on the worn wood floor. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, as I drove home, I noticed a car following me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but every turn I made, the car was still there. When I pulled into my driveway, the car slowed down but didn't stop. I got out, watching as it disappeared down the street. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was nothing. Just a weird coincidence. Then the notes started showing up. Slips of paper shoved under my door or stuck to my windshield. You're not a hero. You don't deserve it. I see you. I never saw who left them, but I knew it was him. One night, I heard footsteps outside my house. By the time I grabbed my gun and opened the door, there was no one there, just the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. I didn't call the cops. What was I going to tell them? That some guy who pretended to be a Navy SEAL was stalking me? They wouldn't take it seriously. But I took it seriously. The last straw came when I found my old Navy uniform, the one I kept in a box in my closet, shredded and scattered across my lawn. The medals were gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window with my gun, waiting for him to show up again. He never did. Eventually, the notes stopped, and the car disappeared. But I never felt safe again. Every time I see someone in uniform now, I can't help but wonder if they've earned it, or if they're another shadow, waiting to remind me that some ghosts don't stay buried.